All right, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because we are in different parts of the world. So it's lovely to be with you again. And thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are honored to have Sarah Ervin, who joins us from Australia. Thank you so much, Sarah, for making the time to talk to our students about a very important topic about positionality in academic writing and critical thinking. Really important issues that we always encourage our students to engage in and read about and take into consideration whenever they write. When I advertised the session, I have received really nice comments from students telling me that we were curious to know more about this particular topic, especially those who are doing MA programs. So thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us. And we are honored to have Melanie and Casey. It's lovely to have you both. So I'll give you the space, Sarah, and usually we have questions at the end of the session. But meantime, guys, if you have any comments or questions, you can send in the chat box, and I'll be monitoring the chat box as Sarah speaks. Sarah, over to you.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. And yeah, it's certainly our pleasure to be here with you today as well, this evening for us. Yes, but absolute pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity for giving us this opportunity to present to you today. So myself, Casey, and Melanie, we are all student learning advisors at the University of Southern Queensland, and we're also AALL members, which is how we got in touch with Ahmed and with you all today. And yeah, our presentation today will be about critical thinking and positionality in shaping the student voice. So I guess as a sort of an outline for today's presentation, we're going to tag team a little bit because we've got different strengths in the team that we really wanted to draw on. So I'll hand it over to Casey in the first instance to do our acknowledgement of country. And then Melanie is going to begin by going through some critical reading tips and tricks, I guess. And then also there's a little activity in there. And then I'm going to be talking about critical writing and I guess looking at some real practical ways of what you can do to make your writing seem more critical. And then I'm going to hand it over to Casey to for the I guess the final half of the presentation where we'll focus on positionality, which I'm sure is going to be a really unique and interesting topic for everyone. I guess I will, with that, I suppose I'll hand it over to Casey for our acknowledgement.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just trying to get the slide to move. Okay. So just for some context, in Australia, we have an Indigenous population made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I am an Aboriginal person. And something that we do here in Australia is an acknowledgement of country, which acknowledges that we live on unceded Indigenous land and that we are still experiencing the repercussions of that colonization that happened. So we're going to read one of our acknowledgement of countries that we do here. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're calling from. So the country, Sarah and I are on Yagara, Jagara and Yurugulpa country and Turrbal country, whereas Mel is calling in from Gaibor and Jarowa country. We pay our respects to elders past and present and thank them for their cultural guidance, their resistance and their strength. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And another important thing of an acknowledgement of country is acknowledging the rights of Indigenous peoples and their right to land sovereignty. So with that sentiment in mind, we acknowledge the connection to country, sea and sky that Palestinian people have and that their ancestors have with the land. We honour your right to exist, live and practice your culture peacefully without the presence, intervention and harm of colonial forces. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass over to Mel now, who is going to first have a look at, sorry, I can't see the screen on my end, so I believe it's reading critically.
Reading critically. That's right. Thank you. Thanks for coming along tonight. Now, we're not expecting to tell you anything brand new and exciting because we know that you are already all on top of this stuff. So we're just giving you some of the things that we do with our students at our university to help them with critical thinking and positionality. We're finding more and more, as I'm sure you all are, in a changing world, especially with AI and social media and all of that kind of stuff, being able to read critically and understand that not everything that you see and hear is necessarily 100% the truth is a really important thing. So we're trying to teach our students how to be critical readers and critical thinkers, which are key skills that we need now and in the future. So when you're reading critically, you are reading for more than just the words, which is obvious to everybody. You are looking to really understand the depth of the text and what it is meaning. And you bring to each of the texts that you engage with a background, your understanding, your education level, your cultural and social background, your age is also a factor, your gender, your position in if you're a disabled person or a LGBTQI plus person, or you've got some sort of other experience that not everyone else has, you'll bring that to the text that you are reading. And so every time you read something, everybody gets something different out of it. We don't all necessarily, we get the same key stuff, as you know, but we'll all think of it a different way. So when you are reading critically, especially in an academic space, but even if you're reading for fun and you're reading fiction, you're thinking about what is the quality of the source. And that's a big thing that we try and get our students to understand, that you can't just be using Wikipedia or social media posts when you are writing your assessment. You actually have to get quality sources from reputable journals and reputable writers. But there's always, you've got to look for if there's an agenda. For example, if you are reading something about climate change and it's written by a mining company, having in the back of your mind that maybe they're going to be saying some stuff that might influence you to side with them rather than really think about the impacts of climate change, for example. So I guess that's about questioning the purpose and the impact of the source. Why is it purposeful? Is it useful to you in your writing? Identifying strengths and weaknesses of the source. That's not necessarily, I don't think, whether it's well written or poorly written, because sometimes stuff that you find boring or you don't think it's particularly well written actually says something of value. It's more about is the person writing and is the article referring to actual credible resources as well, or is it just somebody that you found on the internet who sounds really, really good and really forceful and really excited? Do they actually know what they're talking about? Asking yourself critical questions. I think as we move through this, there'll be some critical questions that we are going to share with you that you might want to start applying to your sources when you're looking for stuff to read. And then, of course, thinking about how your articles all link together or your research all links together. And if it's not necessarily topical for the thing that you're doing in that exact moment, it might be something that in, the next semester of study, you're like, oh, I remember when I read that article, that was actually really good. Casey, could you move the slide, please? Thank you. So you probably already have some ways to evaluate the sources, but these are a couple that we share with our students. Some little ones to remember: proven, Proven. What is the purpose? What is the relevant? Is it objective? Can it be verified? Does it have expertise? And how new is it? Because we know sometimes you need to use current sources. It's fine to use old stuff. Like if you're doing maths, for example, obviously the maths itself hasn't really changed a whole lot in the thousands of years that it's been around. But if you're doing nursing, for example, you really need to be looking at current nursing practices. Unless you're doing a historical comparison, then of course you've got to look at old ones. But I think a lot of people still, like, I'm an education person, and I know that education people here in Australia are still reading and really holding up people who did writing in the 60s and 70s and 80s as key stuff. Yes, it is, but we actually need to move forward as well. So being thoughtful about how much historical stuff do you need. The other review method we use is review, relevance, expertise, viewpoint, intended audience, evidence, and again, when it was published. So those two little ideas help you think about the kinds of questions to use when you're evaluating sources. And this is the kind of stuff we share with our students when they come and say, what do I do with this source? We go through these kinds of things with them. The big one that we find, well, I used to be a teacher, a high school teacher as well, and the kids would struggle with this as well, is how do you verify something, or how do you know that it's reputable? And I think that's something that really, in the current times and as we move forward in a technologically advancing society, we're really going to have to look at who is writing this stuff, and is it even a person, or is it a robot or a company? Those kinds of things. I think the next slide is me, and then I'll hand over to Sarah. Is the next one. Oh, yeah. So I guess thinking critically and reading critically, it goes together. Reflecting on how you are impacted by what you're reading and the biases and understanding that you bring. I guess always questioning things, but not just for the sake of being a pain in the butt and questioning just to be annoying, but legitimately questioning things if you think they're a bit dodgy. Because if you think they're dodgy, they probably are. And it's worth having a think about why you don't like something, or why you're like, this seems strange to me. If it doesn't sit right with you, question it, because there's probably a reason. And then the big thing with critical thinking and critical reading is having an open mind and considering multiple viewpoints, which most people who are studying at university, that's what they're studying at university for, to think about other people's experiences and being open-minded. So those things are part and parcel of being a university student, and something that I think we all have in common, whether you're studying here or where you all are calling in from. We want to create critical thinkers in our society. So I think the next one is a little activity, is it? You will have access to these slides as well. This one is just one of our Australian government frameworks around critical thinking. And again, we'll send you these slides. And then if you want some more information about this framework, we can send you that too. But again, it's just about using the knowledge that you have and then finding out new things that you need to know, and then evaluating it by, sometimes you make assumptions or you make judgments or you make arguments about what you're reading, and then using all of that to make a decision as to how valuable what you've just read is actually going to be. And we often have to tell our students as well, if you read 20 articles, you don't necessarily have to use those 20. If they're not useful, don't use them. If they're not relevant, if they're too old, you can legitimately say, if you in a literature review, I read it, but it wasn't very good. Like, that's part of being a critical reader as well. The next one is the activity, I think. No, I counted them wrong. This is just some of those questions that you might ask yourself when you are reading critically or thinking critically. So I think you would probably all do this anyway. I think, especially if you're in arts and humanities, you tend to ask yourself these questions a lot. I'm not from a science and maths background, so I don't know how much engineers and that kind of business people think of these things, but I would assume that they ask themselves versions of these questions as well. So you can keep this little list of questions handy. They might give you some prompts, especially if you've got to do reflective writing as well, because you can be critical in reflection. It doesn't just have to be this was good, this was bad. You need to sometimes critically analyze how your actions made you do something. Is the next one, Casey, the activity? Oh, I'm going to skip to the activity because I'm thinking of time. Just, we really want people to be critical readers and critical thinkers, because that's where we need to be in the future. This little activity, it is just about putting these things into whether they are like standard reading or critical reading, because of course you read most things when you're reading a book for fun, you're probably not really reading it critically, but you might be. So this little activity is just to put these things into two columns, one that is standard reading or one that is critical reading. I don't know if we've got quite enough time to do that. What do you think, Casey and Sarah? Can we do it quickly or shall we move on?
Maybe we could give people the opportunity to have a think about it and
Yeah.
maybe put their suggestions in the chat.
Yeah.
Or if people
So
feel
maybe,
like speaking up, you could do that too.
yeah. So I mean, if you want to say which ones you think could be under standard reading, which ones could be under critical reading, you can write it in the chat. I might give you like 2 minutes to think about that if you want. You can write it down. You can write it in the chat. You can put like call out, put your hand up if you want to. I think the first one, fun. Some people would put that in both. I think it's meant to go with standard reading, but I think lots of people would say, I actually have fun when I'm reading boring science papers or boring history papers or boring engineering papers. And like I say, we'll give you access to this and then you can use it um, with whomever you wish to use it with. So, what kind of things do you think would go with the standard reading? So that's, reading for fun, I guess, not reading academically necessarily. What are like 3 things that would go in that column? You can put in the chat or you can call out. Shall we show you the answers in case people are a bit reluctant to share what they're thinking? This is kind of where we've put the things. You might think it's different. That could generate some discussion as well. I think the key thing is the surface level reading. When you're reading, not academically, you are just able to skim and scan and surface read stuff. But of course, when you're looking for information for research, you've got to delve a bit deeper. So the deep reading's in there too. Yes, Rima says fun, passive, and unquestioning will be standard. Absolutely. Because we kind of do that in all the types of reading that we look at. Thank you. And, evaluating and being skeptical. And again, not just being skeptical for the sake of it, but if you do think it's weird and it doesn't make sense, question it, ask people, show other people and go, do you think this is weird too? Because sometimes it's nice to have someone go, yes, it is weird. And you're like, okay, it's not just me. That's good. All right. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Mel. I'm going to be, I guess, taking off what Mel has said and focusing, I guess, a little bit more on the writing critically side of it. So when you're actually writing something, how do you differentiate something that is critical or that is not being critical in your writing, particularly when you're writing in academia? So I guess this slide is really giving you a few suggestions of the typical kind of language that we use when we're writing critically. We often get questions from students, oh, I'm asked to write critically, but what does it look like? So sometimes it's helpful to have a table like this to look at and to give you a bit of an idea on some of the general things that we see that indicate that something is written a little bit more critically from an academic lens rather than just being overly descriptive. So you can see there's a few common suggestions there in the column. So in the first column, there's lots of language there for comparing and contrasting, which is something you do quite a lot to show you're looking at different sides of things. And then in the middle column is about identifying biases, strengths, and weaknesses. And this is something you're often asked to do for writing assessments at university, compare and contrasting different types of language and writing. And then that final column is about connecting ideas. So showing the similarities between ideas, differences as well. And that kind of language, like the as a result, or this indicates that, this is evidence that, or for that reason, that's all kind of language that tells us why something is important. And that's often something that we see is missing from students' papers who don't write critically enough, is that connection between ideas and showing the relationships between things. Because you can present something, you could present some evidence or present an example of something, but you need to tell us what's important about that or why it's significant. So there's some suggestions of how you can do that. Thanks, Casey. And again, a little bit more of some examples of what that looks like in the descriptive writing versus the critical writing. So some of those things, um, and I guess examples of what you can do. So descriptive writing states what's going on, what's happening, or defines a topic or a situation. It might outline a theory. Theory A says blah 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 blah. Um, Whereas the critical writing is the more, the good stuff, I guess, of the writing that we're really looking at. So saying what is the significance of what's happened, questioning and explaining ideas, and comparing, contrasting, looking at strengths and weaknesses. That's all the really good stuff. And we see, particularly at our university, that um, a lot of marking in terms of getting good marks. We like to see from academic papers more of what's in the right hand column than the left hand column. So the left hand column is still important, and you still need to do those things like define and list and outline things to show that you understand them. But putting them into practice is what you're doing when you're writing critically. So that's really important. Thanks, Casey. So another quick activity here. I hope this is going to be okay for people to read. It might be a little bit small, but we'll see how we go. I might give people just a couple of minutes to read through two examples of writing. There's example 1 and example 2, and one of them is more descriptive, and the other one is more critical and shows a bit more critical thinking. So take a moment now to have a bit of a read through and see what you think, and maybe some reasons why. And when you're ready, yeah, feel free to speak up, or we'll put some thoughts in the chat. Hopefully, you've had a little bit of time to read through both pieces. I know that they're taken quite out of context. They're kind of about, you know, watching films and things like that. But I guess it's more just looking at what how it's being written, and when not the what of what's being said, but how it's being said. So which of these potentially could be more critical, and why? maybe we can skip to the next slide, Casey. Oh, thank you. Yes, the second one's more critical. Well done. Yes. And we've got, yeah, I guess some of those examples there as well. Feel free to put in your own thoughts and what you were thinking maybe when you were reading each of those. So yes, example one is definitely more descriptive as it states what happens and explains the situation. But yeah, example two, you could see that there was some references in there and there was evidence used to support arguments. So that made it more critical. And yeah, I guess that's one of the key examples, but um, they've also limited the use of description in the second example as well. So while they did spend a little bit of time describing it, they spent more of that time in the providing evidence and argument and showing the significance of things. Oh, excellent. Thanks. I can just see the chat there. Thanks, everyone. That's great. Is that the last one for me, Casey? I think I'm handing it over to you for
Yes.
positionality.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah. All right. Okay, now I'm doing both slides and talking, so I'm going to do my best to get myself on track. So the next couple of slides are looking at this concept of positionality. So once we've kind of done our critical reading and we're working towards our critical writing, in our assignments, we've got to also consider where we fall within or where we sit within the knowledge that we're actually looking at and reading, or how we go about looking for knowledge and that sort of thing. And that'll make a bit more sense when we get to the activity. But what actually is this concept of positionality? So positionality focuses on our worldviews in relation to social identities. That is, it focuses on how our individual identities have been constructed based on environmental factors, cultural factors, societal influences. It explores how these identities impact our worldview, including how we see, understand, and engage with knowledge and the world around us. It also examines how these identities are linked with privilege or disadvantage, and what that means for how we operate within the wider societal system. Positionality is really important as it supports us to be self-aware and reflexive, which means sort of understanding, again, why we act certain ways in situations, why we feel certain things in situations compared to someone else who maybe acts or feels differently. It supports us to be conscious of other ways of knowing, being, and doing, of how other people interpret the world. It helps us to identify axes of power and contextualize learning and knowledge within systems of privilege. It helps us to supports us to identify our own marginalized identities as an act of resistance. It allows us to present our student voice and explore our lived and survived experiences within the context of learning. And importantly, it also allows us to present counter narratives to those systems of power and privilege, particularly when we are talking in our assignments and our academia. Sorry, I can't quite see my screen, so I'm just trying to see what we've got here. So positionality as a critical analysis tool. So when we're reading or thinking or writing for our assignments, positionality helps us to analyze the influence of what we're reading, what we're thinking, how we're writing, how we're finding that information. So some considerations or questions to ask yourself as you're kind of collecting resources and readings, or as you're traveling through your writing, consider how are your identities influencing how you find sources, how you engage with those sources, and how you write about them. And that can be down to what search terms you're using to find sources, what books you go to find sources. How does your positionality align or not align with biases, strengths, and weaknesses in sources? So this can help, again, with that kind of critical thinking when it comes to reading. How does your, do you identify a strength in the reading that maybe someone else with a different identity wouldn't, for example? How can your ideas contribute to an alternative understanding or perspective on the source, especially when we're talking that counter narrative to systems of privilege? Often when you're a marginalized cohort, and I say this as someone in the Australian context, our Indigenous population, which I'm part of, are very marginalized in society, and our experiences are not at the forefront. So often we can spot gaps in the literature, in the academia, in our essays and that sort of stuff that we can talk to. So that's sort of an example of that one. So another activity, this one's a bit more in depth. So I will kind of work through it maybe a bit slowly. So in this example activity, let's say we've got 3 different students. They've all been tasked to write the same essay. They're in the same course. They're taking the same subject. They've got to do the same essay. And they've got to write an essay discussing the causes of coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef and the impact that is having in Australia. The activity is to consider how each student's position, so their personal identity, in relation to the assessment task impacts how they might approach the essay. So impacts what they research, how they research it, and what they write about. So again, just once we go through the student profiles here, have a bit of it. I'll give everybody some time to kind of consider how it might impact what they write about, what they research, what it might mean for their identities, and you can pop that in the chat like we've been doing so far. So student 1 is a Bachelor of Environment and Sustainability student. They're a nature lover, an animal lover. They're focused on decolonizing and indigenizing business. They're an Indigenous person, so they come from a culture that's really collectivist, so they work for community rather than for themselves. And they're relatively young. They're 28 years old. Student number 2 is studying a Bachelor of Tourism. They're a really avid traveler. They've visited the reef quite a few times, so they have a connection to it. They're really focused on building sustainable and ethical business. They're a first generation immigrant to Australia, also from a collectivist society. So again, they've got more commitments to family and community. Again, they're kind of middle-aged, 41. I don't even think that's that old, to be honest. So still on the younger end, in my opinion. And student 3 is a Bachelor of International Business student. They're a climate change denier. They prefer to focus on driving profit by any means necessary. And they're a white Australian, and generationally so. So they've been brought up in a really individualistic society, kind of self-serving. And they're on the older side of things at 72 years old. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes just to consider how would each student, and don't feel, you can just pick one and consider, maybe you want to focus on student 1. How would their positionality impact how they research, what they read, and how they complete their assignment? So I'll give about 5 minutes, pop it in the chat, and we can go from there. There's also no right or wrong answers with this one. Positionality is a really fluid concept. Yes, fantastic. I'll just read from the chat. The first student will have more knowledge in the topic considering his major. His age also plays a role as he might be more engaged in social media and communities. Fantastic. And I will also say, not ones I personally picked up in the next slide, which has some ideas. And that's why I'm saying positionality is really complex. So we have so many identities. So that's really, really good pickup. I love that. I'll give it a couple more minutes, maybe one more, two more, and then we'll go to the next slide and have a look at some of the little things I pulled out. But again, there's no right or wrong. It's just getting the thinking to go, how might my own experiences and ways of knowing, being, and doing impact how I approach essays, how I approach academia. So I might switch to that slide. So this is sort of where I came to. Again, no right or wrong, and there definitely could be so many more different elements of their positionality. So let's say student one, because of their positionality, they immediately go to find sources that evidence rapid climate change because they were an environmental student. That's their experience. So that means they're going to find some sources discussing how climate change impacts the reef. And again, they've got an Indigenous background, so they might be going automatically to find some sources that have that lens to it as well, how the reef and water plays a really important role culturally for our Indigenous population. So they might find sources how it's negatively impacting the environment and the local ecosystems, again, because of their major. Student number two, again, is probably going to go and look for similar sources as well, because they're focused on tourism and on sustainable business. But it might result in a slightly different essay position. Instead, they're going to talk about, when it comes to the impacts, instead of looking at, Indigenous, the negative impacts on nature and Indigenous people, because they've got a background in tourism, they're actually going to potentially, maybe their essay has a bit more of a lens about the negative impacts on the Australian tourism market, and the kind of the economic element. And then number three, because they're a climate denier, they're going to potentially avoid those sources altogether, because they simply don't believe in it. So that's how their positionality might influence their search for resources. So instead, because they're really focused on economic outcome at any cost, maybe they're going to look at, well, let's have a look at all of the important trade that happens around the barrier reef and have a discussion of cost benefit. Okay, if all of these businesses that are polluting the barrier reef are actually making all of this money, is it worth it? So their essay has a very, very different direction based on their positionality. So it's a very unique experience, and everybody's positionality is going to look different. But the important thing to take away, I think, from a positionality discussion is it is an important way to ensure that marginalized voices have an opportunity, particularly in academia, in the university, in higher education, to present counter narratives to more stereotypical, let's say, stories that are out there. It's a really important way to tell your narrative from your lens. And that's why I think it's a really important way to evidence kind of your critical engagement with the resources, and it shows your experience with those resources. So this is not another activity. This is just an example of how in a couple of the other lessons where I talk about positionality, we talk about positionality mapping. And it's something that you can sit down and do if you want to, if you ever want to think. This is a very surface level one, because again, positionality comes in and identities come in 1,000 different variations, but it kind of gets you thinking, what's my citizenship status? What's my physical ability? Do I have a disability? What's my age? What's my gender? What class am I in? What race am I? What ethnicity am I? It just gets you thinking. And this is pulled from a journal article, and the authors of that journal article actually created one as an exemplar. So you kind of see here from one of them that they're middle class, they have a Canadian citizenship, they're able-bodied, again, they're kind of, youngish, South Asian, Indian, heterosexual, and then the next layer down is a high level of what that means for their life. So if we take middle class, it means they've got relatively good shelter, they've got a good education. And then the next layer down is, what does that mean? They've got a feeling of safety, but it means they've got a feeling of responsibility to ensure their family still has, a roof over their head, that sort of stuff. So it just is the positionality mapping just sort of helps step each bit down if this is something you want to explore more. Again, something you can do later once you get a copy of the slides, but not something that we have to do right now because it can take quite a bit of time. And actually, I was going to say, I think that might bring us to the end. So these are just the references that we use for the presentation, but I'm going to hand back over to Sarah, I think, to wrap up. And then I think we've got some question time and that sort of stuff.
That's great, Casey. Thanks. I just wanted to point out, Elisa, sorry, just had a comment. I think that really summed up what you were talking about there with positionality. And it just says, reflecting on positionality feels like entering an infinite hall of mirrors with awareness of each relative position, opening up the possibility of realizing the next one and the next one and the next one and so on. And I really like that. I think that it really explains it so well. So that's the end of our formal presentation today. We really wanted to make sure we had time for questions and conversation at the end. And we will definitely send the slides on to Dr. Ahmed to send on to you all as well. So we're happy to leave it there for today and open it up to questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Sarah, Casey, and Mel. That was really a wonderful presentation. And as I was listening, I had this thought that probably academic writing books or textbooks that are often used in undergraduate programs or even most postgraduate programs, many of them seem to lack those topics and concepts, probably focusing on the technicalities and the mechanics of writing. And these are issues, I think, mechanics are important, but also issues like positionality and critical thinking and voice as well, and human voice are issues that need more emphasis in like programs, university programs or training programs. So thank you so much for highlighting those important aspects. And guys, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask your question, or you can send the question in the chat box. Sujud, please go ahead.
First, thank you for this session. It's really useful. My question is like when I have to write an essay, let's suppose it's writing an essay on toolbox, but I also have to include like secondary sources. Do I have first to read the toolbox and then write my essay and then read the secondary sources and then inject my essay of these, like whatever I get from the secondary sources? Or do I have to read the two boxes and the secondary sources and then start writing?
I guess it just depends on your personal preference and the process that you take on. The fact that you've asked that question shows that you're already doing that critical thinking. Whatever works for you. If it were me, I would read the two books, and then I would write what I want to write, and then I would go and look for the secondary stuff. But I know that other people do that differently, so it's really just what works for you, and it might change every time you do a different piece of assessment, but you're already thinking about those external factors. So you're on track to be doing what you need to do successfully anyway.
Yeah, so it just depends.
Yeah, it just depends. Yeah.
I have another question, like when to do the editing, I actually like start writing a paragraph and then I start writing the second paragraph. And then when I get bored from writing, I just go to editing. Is that like normal, or do I have to finish writing and then start editing?
Again, it is different
That's a
to
great
everybody.
question.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
works for you. We tell our students that all the time. Yeah. Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I was just going to jump in on that one because this is something I hear. This is such a common question from our students as well, and I think it really comes down to um, what works for you. Academic writing is not a linear process, and while we can talk about strategies and techniques, I think as you grow and as you practice as a writer, you take on what's going to work for you at the end of the day. For some of our students, I know sometimes it's good just to get it out. Sometimes you just need to like just blur and like write and then come back to it later. I tend to be a bit like that sometimes, depending on what I'm writing, where you just want to get the words on the page, but then come back to it later and then do a bit more fine tuning and editing. But other people like to take a different approach and, carefully write as they go through and check it as they go along the way. So I think at the end of the day, just yeah, reflecting on your own processes and what works for you will be best. Yeah.
Oh, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sujud. We've got another
Yes.
question from Dr. Yahya. Go ahead, yes.
Yes. Thank you for your amazing session. Really, the question is, want you to give advice to students how they bridge between reading critically, writing critically, and critical thinking. May you give advice to students how they can keep in mind all these skills?
I might
Oh
take that
yeah,
one since
another
Val
really
and
good
Sarah,
question. Yeah,
you
go
go,
go
Sarah.
for it.
No,
No,
you go, you go.
no. If you've got an idea, Casey, you take it.
Um, I think especially if it's something you're getting more used to, I think this is something we say a lot to our what we would call our pathway students or our first year undergrad students. Is sometimes it's good to have essentially a system. Um, so however that might be a note-taking system of where you go from each of those steps. So I've read the source critically, I've made my notes. Now that goes somewhere that then feeds into I've made the note from the textbook, let's say, and then I've made my notes of my critical thinking about what that piece of text meant that then goes into my essay. So it becomes a journey of it. Eventually, you're teaching yourself that process. And then, by the next year, by your third year, and so forth, it's a bit more of a natural process, but it doesn't happen overnight. So you've actually got to do that brain training almost. So it's that very kind of disciplined, like, I've got to do each step. But I don't know if Sarah Mel, if you have a different kind of take on that.
No, that sounds like the kind of thing that students do. We've probably got some resources around that kind of stuff, or can certainly get some together for you and pass them on. I know in my previous life, the history kids had to do a research journal, and a third of that journal was what Casey just explained. What have I read? And then all the questions that came from what they had read. So I should be able to find some resources from that, so we can share that kind of stuff with you if that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for appreciation.
Thank you, Dr. Yahya. And we've got a question from Ragad. Ragad, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone, and greetings to all of you. First off, to thank you so much for organizing this insightful webinar. Actually, I have a reflective question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So, as we come from diverse backgrounds, our experiences can, shape the way we read and understand texts. So, how can we practice critical reading while being aware of our own positionality without letting personal biases limit our interpretation? Yeah, thank you.
I could answer that from a
AC, do you want to?
non-academic reader space, and then hand over to Casey for academia. As a reader, like a voracious reader, I try to read different authors from different backgrounds. I try to read international books that have been translated. So that kind of reading can help you build empathy with other people from other experiences. And that's something that when you're teaching young people to read or encouraging them to read, it's showing them, don't just read, like I don't just read Australian middle-aged white authors. I read all types of people, and fiction and non-fiction, and that's how you learn about the world as well. So that's a really easy way to read critically from a fun, non-academic perspective. Casey?
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with Mel's sentiment there in terms of reading widely is important, and that's where that critical thinking comes in. If I've read something that you're definitely like, oh, I think the person that wrote this maybe doesn't have the best intentions, but from a position of someone again who is in the Australian context a more marginalized person, I don't think you should shy away from the positionality. I think that's actually the strength. That how you engage with that source is not a bad thing of your personal experience with that source, or how you write that essay. It's not inherently a bad thing. Your positionality, you can't kind of shed it. It's who you are inherently. It's about being aware of how it might be influencing different aspects, and then trying to counter that with different narratives. But it's definitely, there's times where it's actually a strength. So it's definitely not something to completely shy away from. It's just sort of trying to balance both ends of it. And that can be done with, like what Mel was saying, reading widely.
And sometimes it's good to read stuff that makes you angry and makes you annoyed, because it motivates you to to do something about it, whether you're like, well, I'm going to write something to counteract that, or I'm going to go and tell people that that book was horrible and that article was horrible. So sometimes the discomfort that comes with that reading too is also a good thing, not always bad. Someone in the chat has said, whenever I write, I always feel my tone is not totally academic. How do I improve it? I mean to use like more academic words. Is it all about reading more academic materials? That is a tricky one, because sometimes simpler is better when you're writing academically. You don't need to have fancy words or flowery language to make it sound good. We get a lot of our students who just use the thesaurus on Word and change all the words, and then it changes the meaning of what they're writing, but they think it sounds fancy. Um, read more academic stuff, because then you'll see patterns. What do you guys think, Casey and Sarah?
That's what I was going to say is reading more really does help.
Hmm.
Because I often find, especially students who have like a writing block as well, who don't know how to get started on an essay and they've done all the work in breaking down a task, still can't get started. Reading more can really help get you in the right mindset. And yeah, I guess um, it is a journey as well with academic writing. It's not like one day you wake up or you have that one class that just taught you everything you need to know and then off you go. It is a process to develop the skills. And as long as you're remaining engaged and you're, talking with your peers and, your lecturers, your teachers, those people who surround yourself in a community who's going to support you, that's also really important as well. It can often feel very isolating, academic writing in particular. So I think having that community around you as well to support your development and your journey as a student is really important.
There is a question for Casey in the chat, but I have a question for all of you before we go to that one. I'm just interested, how many of you are undergraduate students and how many of you are postgraduate, like master's, PhD level people? Like, or are you all undergraduate, or what's the kind of
It's a mix, I
makeup?
suppose.
Okay, yeah, cool.
It's a mix of undergrads, mostly undergrads, and I know a few are postgraduate students are doing MA in applied linguistics. Others are in ELT, a few in translation.
Yeah, because you get better at writing as you get through, but the three of us are doing and have done a postgraduate and are doing more postgraduate stuff. We're still learning, we're still improving, we're still getting better. every time you open up a document to write, it's like starting from scratch. You've got to remind yourself how to do it. So you just get better. And if you're willing to learn, you'll always be improving throughout your life, reading more, writing more, trying to improve. That's a great thing. Casey, there's a question. Can you speak about how you cope when positionality leads to awareness on conflicts of interest? Perhaps most significantly, awareness of our own position being contrary to prevailing economic interests, including those involved in funding, for example, research on climate change and who benefits from apparent results in either direction. So a nice meaty question for you.
Yes, no, it's a good question. Often, again, I'm not sure. It's becoming a more popular thing to see. It's not super mainstream, but it's becoming a thing in journal articles. Is there might be a positionality statement by the author that kind of says, "This is my identities. This is how it's influenced the research," and that might include a statement around the funding they've received for that research and how that intermixes. Often, if you've got multiple researchers on, you're minimizing the impact of the positionality because hopefully you've got a diverse mix of researchers. So where one's kind of got a gap, for example, let's take, for example, if it was Sarah, Mel and I researching, I'm Indigenous, they're not. So where they have a gap in terms of kind of Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing, I would fill that gap. Where I don't, let's say it was research with students as an additional language, that's Sarah's background. If it was, and we're also talking about how education for that area works, I haven't got that, Mel's got that, Sarah's got that. So you're sort of piecing it together in that space. When we're looking at a more one on like just a personal lens, when you kind of come across something and your positionality, or it makes you kind of go, oh, I might have not sure the word, a differing opinion or a differing experience with the stereotypical experience, lean into that. That's when you can lean into that counter narrative. So I'm trying to think of a good example of where that might happen. Trying to think of something. That's a tricky one. I'm sure I'd have something, but to think of something on the spot is quite tricky. But I guess really again, it kind of comes back to the idea that positionality is not something that we should be running away from. The argument is that we need to be aware of it so we can see the bias, so we can fill and fix the bias. We all have a bias of so many different things because of our lived and survived experiences. We can't help that. That's who we are. But we need to do our best to try to make sure it isn't impacting negatively in our research. So the positionality helps us to identify what is it. So how can I go about filling that gap? Is it building more people into the research team or finding more sources that fill that gap so I can sort of be a bit more, comprehensive in how I'm tackling the subject and that sort of thing. I hope that answered that question. It is a bit of a big one and I'm trying to do my best to answer it. So I hope that's done it.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. I had a question, if you don't mind. I mean, we're talking about things that are deeply rooted in one's background and experiences when it comes to identity, background, personal stories. And those emerge, they feature whenever we write as writers, and they influence our writing. This is positionality at the end of the day. I mean, what is your advice to students who, I'm sure as learning advisors, you come across this issue so much recently with students who heavily depend or slavishly just use AI generated content. And I'm sure this clashes strongly with what we are talking about. I mean, at the end of the day, you are using a machine that is just trained to produce content or generate content in a way that just parrots content without going deeply into those issues that are purely human and personal and different. So what is your advice to our students who may think that AI may replace them or their voice or their role in writing?
Who wants to
You
That's
can
take it
actually
always
a good
first?
tell
We've
one,
all
I
got
think.
strong opinions.
Oh,
you can always
we all jumped
tell
in there.
when it's not human. Like you can tell when the writing is not human, especially with reflection, because there's awkward ways that the AI will word things. Um, you can tell when people have used AI to do critical thinking because it's really generic, obvious stuff. Um, Look, my advice would be don't use it for critical thinking. Don't use it for reflection. Um, we know that the reality of the future is people are going to use it, but it's not going to replace the humanistic elements of people's writing and student voice. And student voice is what we are really all about in your assessment. The lecturers need to see what you as the individual one understands, but two, how you're applying that knowledge. And you can't do that with the AI because you'll get caught out in the end. Like you might have a really good paper and they're like, oh, you know exactly what you're talking about. But then in your job in the future or in a conversation at, a party with someone, you'll get yourself into trouble because they'll ask a question and you won't know the answer. So you've got to remember, while I guess AI has a place for those people who like to use it, it cannot replace the human aspect of thinking. And that's why the robots aren't going to take us over at the moment, I don't think. But I know the
Yeah,
other girls have
I,
um
I was just going to
some
speak more
thoughts.
broadly on that too. Yeah, and just pick up on what Mel said. Yeah, and we're seeing a lot as well, a transition slowly in the university to assessments that are not exactly not traditionally academic, but more where we do want to hear that authentic voice and we do want to hear that the student voice coming through in the writing. So we're seeing a lot more reflective tasks, journal writing, forum posting, where you're bringing yourself into the work and acknowledging that you're on a journey as a student to your graduation. So that's something that's really starting to seep in, I think, not only to combat that sort of Gen AI aspect, but also, I guess, because it is important and we do need to acknowledge and talk about that point of it because that's what makes academic writing what it is really, is that we're if as long as we all remain critical in what we're doing, uh, remaining with the critical thinking, the critical writing, that's where it has to be at the end of the day. And I also remember I was attending a webinar with Professor Michael Henderson, who's specialized in this area in Australia, and he was talking about with when you ask it to generate a text with the software, it's not good at that critical writing part of it. It hallucinates and it makes up references and things, and it really gets that part of it so wrong. And that's because it has to be authentic. So, I mean, who knows? It could improve in the future, but that's not where it's at the moment. So,
I'll have my
yeah.
little 2 cents on it too. Um, I have a slightly different lens on it, as in from an Indigenous lens. I have a big issue with AI because it takes our voice. Being from a culture where we had a colonial system strip our language, strip our cultures, strip our ways of being, and everything like that. The opportunity that we have now, that we've fought for to have in higher education, to be able to produce academia and research, to be able to talk about our real experiences, to then hand it over to a robot that has no idea about what that is. I cannot, as an Indigenous person, I'm like, it's a no from me. Yeah, I think, again, like Mel said, it is the future. It's going to happen. Um, and there's ethical ways to do it. But yeah, letting it kind of be your voice is not, yeah, for me, I definitely can't see it from the way that I view the world, basically.
There's some good comments in the chat of people saying, it can't think, it only generates, and It should be used as a supportive tool, not a replacement. If we could convince, especially very young students, that, like the high school leavers, that would be great. I've put a question in the chat there, and again, this might be something that you'll share with us in the future. We are always looking for different types of AI that people are using, because that's how we as learning advisors understand the process as well. So if you have good programs that you are using that you think are worth, sharing with other people, please share that with us, because, we need to know what people are using it and what people like and why they're using it for. So, feel free to contact us and say, I found this really good thing, or this is how I use it, because we want to learn that too. Yeah, some more good comments. Maybe never rely on AI, use your mind because you have it for a reason. When the thing is for free, then you are the product. How good is that? Yeah. All right, it counts. So yeah. It's an interesting one. Again, this is a question for all of you, and maybe the academics more. Are you seeing significant numbers of AI generated assessment? Is there particular particular subjects that are getting it more? Like, is it engineers, or is it nurses, or is it education, or is it just across the board? Because we're kind of seeing it in a few, like engineering, there's a lot more use of the AI, for example. But what about for you all there? What are you seeing?
Well, personally, I feel it's across the board, honestly. I mean, it feels that, in education and applied linguistics, we feel it's there. It's heavily used, and sometimes you justify it in specific contexts, given the circumstances some students go through. But again, as you said, it ends up replacing their voice, and it's worrying, honestly. I have personal problems with AI when it comes to creating or generating content, for example, for academia, for media. It's all over the place. I mean, if you just look at social media and how it just, the images that are created by AI, they don't feel like, I mean, even videos nowadays are all over the place. And when sometimes you feel that, oh, it's real. But if you examine the content carefully, it ends up to be AI generated, which is really misleading, and especially for, in our context, I'm too worried about this, not ethical. I don't want to say unethical use, but not careful use of AI, because especially for our context, as Casey said, as Palestinians who are worried too much about the narrative and protecting the narrative, which is just, and a narrative that doesn't need any cosmetics. It is a strong narrative. It's a unique narrative. Just put it there and everyone believe it, because it's a just and honest narrative. Adding any AI or any generated content that is not real will not make it better. Recently we've been talking about stormy weather in Gaza, and how people who have been living in tents and shelters are badly affected by this cold weather, and they are living in tents without any shelter, without, it's extremely cold weather. And then when you see content that is generated using AI of children shivering and it won't benefit the narrative, but it ends up like we discovered that this content is generated using AI by the counter narrative, not by Palestinians themselves. And that's the danger of the not careful or unethical sometimes use of AI platforms. In answer to your question, Mel, about the platforms that our students use, I've heard of ChatGPT is most commonly used.
Okay.
Any other platforms? Sujud, the other day you mentioned a few of them. If you want to share those with us, guys, in the chat box. So ChatGPT is widely used. What else? Any other platforms that you use, guys?
Gemini.
Gemini,
Yep.
yeah, that's common.
That's pretty common. Copilot, do you have Copilot there? I know we can
Copilot
use
is
Copilot.
also popular. Is also popular.
Perplexity
DeepSeek,
also.
Black Box.
What was that?
Perplexity.
Oh,
Perplexity.
Perplexity. Okay. I'm going to write these down because then we can.
Black box.
Because we,
I've never
Yeah.
heard of black box. What is black box? Is it similar to ChatGPT, Ragat?
Are indeed actually similar to Gemini. Almost the
Okay.
same. Yeah.
Manus. And Manus as well.
I mean, students know far more about it than
Yeah.
we do. So we've got to learn how to use it. 10, 15 years ago here in Australia, they used to teach explicit critical literacy and media literacy courses at high schools where you showed kids photos and said, let's look at how a photo doesn't tell you everything. And then they stopped teaching that. And now we've gone back to where we actually need to go back to this is how you look at something and, deconstruct it. And this is what it looks like, but what could be happening. We need a bit more of that, I think, even before university, because university students, are usually at least understanding that you've got to think differently about what you're seeing and hearing. But, teenagers and young people just believe whatever they see. So, hopefully we'll go back to more of that explicit teaching of that kind of critical literacy. Hopefully. But it's interesting. I'm glad to hear that it is like a global problem, that it's not just our students trying to get one over.
Absolutely. It is global.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's everywhere. And look, Sujud suggested DeepSeek, and at the same time she says this one is too bad, by the way, which is interesting. Sujud knows the name and knows the features of the platform. That's interesting. The other day I received a message from one student, and she was asking me, can you please help? I said, yeah, what's going on? She said, I'm trying to upload a PDF book on a website, and it's one of those AI platforms, and the upload fails. I said, come on, why are you doing that? She said, I want to summarize the whole book instead of reading it. I mean, it's a textbook. And I said, look, well, I don't have any technical advice, but I can give you advice when it comes to why you're not reading the whole book, because at the end of the day, you're a student. And a summary of the book won't really be enough because you are supposed to read the whole content. So yeah, I mean, there must be more of guidance when it comes to how to use AI ethically and more professionally. Any other questions, guys, or comments?
I think Ruba has their hand up, I think.
Ruba, go ahead, yes.
I was raising my hand to answer a question when Mrs. Diane asked a question regarding, if when you asked like about if we use the generative, if you believe there are some majors use generative AI more than other students in different majors.
Oh yeah.
And I believe so, because one of my cousins is engineer, and she said the AI is taking over our job as engineers. So all the students do not study or do anything, and they just do the coding things using the AI, and that's it. Even in the exams and everything, they said without spending hours doing coding and stuff, this would take so much time, so much energy. And while we are trying so hard to study this and understand it and doing it, meanwhile in the mean age right now, the AI is taking over our jobs. So everyone's feeling desperate and feeling like there is no use of studying this major anymore, like programming and this field of the major. So they felt some kind of fell down because the AI is taking their jobs. But for me,
Yeah.
I believe that our major, like when it comes to writing and things that needs more creativeness, I feel the AI is not much creative as humans. So no matter how many people like try to use AI in writing, it's not as good as the human, production when it comes to uh, creative writing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it can't quite do the creative stuff particularly well yet. That's interesting about your engineering cousin, because that's very similar to what we're seeing currently in the same field. So that's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Roba. Guys, I'm just aware of the time and also the time difference. I know it's late now in Australia, and I don't want to hold our speakers any longer. But we'd like to thank them very much for the time they've spent with us today. I just want to finish by saying this. Last night, I received a message from one of the students who is present today. I don't want to mention the name, but she said, "Look, whenever I feel sad or down, I get an announcement about a webinar that is coming, and where we listen to wonderful people who join us and talk to us, and it gives me too much positivity, and it lets my day up. So I'm just trying to convey this message to all of you guys who join us today. That thank you so much, Sarah, Mel, and Cassie, and George as well. You let them their day up honestly today, and be sure that what you've done is heroic, especially in these circumstances, and it never goes unnoticed. Honestly, we really appreciate it. We really appreciate the time and expertise that you shared with our students today, and be sure that this session makes a difference in everybody's life who joined us today, and I'm sure those who will watch the recording will benefit and relate to what I'm talking about. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to having you in more sessions in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank
And
you all
I think
so much. It's really been our pleasure as well. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you very
Love
much.
to do it again
reach out
sometime.
if you reach out to Dr. Ahmed, who can contact Sarah.
Absolutely.
And if you have questions for us, we can help you. There was a question earlier about can I send you something for us to read? I mean, sure, we're happy to read stuff. We could work out what you needed for us to read, but just reach out through your
I'll make the
lecturers.
connection.
Yeah. Excuse me, Dr. Ahmed, please, one word.
Yes, sure.
Yes, I really like to thank this amazing webinar, really. But I really I add something that many students are waiting for this such webinars. Why? Because it is a matter of alleviating their sadness, and it is a type of motivation to them in this bad situation. Thanks all, and thank you, Dr. Ahmed, and all the presenters. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rehan. Thank you, everyone. Take care and see you soon. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.